I'm Katie Bennett-Stenton, a dual Australian US citizen and the National Marketing Lead for Energy, Resources and Industrials with Deloitte in Australia. I'm fortunate to be spending 2 exciting months based in the US while I put my kids into school and finalise their US citizenship. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to spend time with a number of global experts, thinkers and leaders. I'm currently immersing myself in a different culture within a much larger team, and I'm excited about the insights and learnings. Throughout this time, I'm speaking to different leaders and sharing thought-provoking, relevant and influential takeaways. Today, I'm in the world's energy capital and speaking with Andrew Slaugher, who is the Executive Director of the Deloitte Centre for Energy Solutions. First met Andrew about 3 years ago in Australia, and really looking forward to continuing the conversation today. Andrew, welcome.
Thank you, Katie. It's a great pleasure to talk to you today.
It'd be really great if you could just tell listeners a little bit about your background, Andrew, please.
Yes, well, I'm originally British, as you might tell from my accent, although I've been in the US for knocking on 20 years now. Really, I've spent half my career in Europe or based in Europe, and half my career in the United States. But all of that time I've been in energy, up and down the oil and gas value chain, and then switching around between big corporate organizations and consulting and advisory firms. Again, about a 50-50 split between the two.
Thanks, Andrew. So with that in mind, I'm interested to understand how your life and career have improved as a result of being better connected with people across the globe.
You know, I've always had an international component to my career. Although I started in the UK quite early in the career, I moved my base to continental Europe, to Paris, and took up a consulting job which took me right across Western Europe, into the Middle East, across a lot of French and Portuguese speaking African countries, a little bit into Asia. And then since I moved to the US, I've covered North America pretty extensively. So I've always had an international component, and it's great because you see people are pretty much the same the whole world over. We're all driven by the same wants, desires, needs and drivers. Really what's different is the context, strong institutions, frameworks in which people operate, which work better in some places than others. But it's just great to meet people and share experiences, and we have a lot more in common than we have that separates us, where in whichever part of the world you're talking about.
So you said you focused a bit on French and Portuguese speaking. Do you speak some other languages?
My educational background, I studied French and Spanish, and so then moving along, I was able to pick up Portuguese and Italian, essentially, particularly when I was working a lot across Europe and then in Africa. One of my early assignments was in Angola, and I got to do a series of executive training courses there, and that was kind of my Spanish mutated into Portuguese over the course of these training courses that I was delivering. So I can get by. Yes.
Mutated. Gee, I'd say evolved. I'm incredibly impressed by anybody who can speak a few languages. I'm not particularly good at them.
Yes, I mean you pick it up. It's really not book learning. You pick it up by being in a context. As I said, I moved to Paris as well fairly early in my career, so that I had a good basic grounding, obviously, but that made French very, very comfortable. I've also lived a short while in Spain and speak it quite well.
Are there many countries that you haven't been to?
Oh yes, loads. I mean, probably I've been to less than 50 countries around the world.
It's pretty respectable.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, you go where you need to go. I don't mind packing up my suitcase. Well, I used not to mind packing up my suitcase and traveling. It does change when you've got kids, and
yes, it does.
And I think that was at one stage when I left the consulting business and moved into more of a corporate world just because I wanted less travel at that
Sure.
point. Yeah.
Yeah, there's something to be said for actually being around with the children.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah. So, Andrew, you packed up your suitcase at least once to come visit us in Australia. Tell me, is there one thing in particular, or perhaps more than one, that you don't particularly understand about Australia or Australians, apart from our dodgy cricket playing of late?
Well, actually, sport is huge in Australia. It's probably bigger in Australia than any other place I've been. And so not knowing something is more a function of me not making the effort than it being hard to understand. But I guess Aussie rules is the one that's hardest to get your arms around. It looks like a huge field with a bunch of people doing anything they want. But I've never taken the time to really get to understand that.
Have you been to a match there?
No, I've seen some on TV.
Okay, I was chatting to a friend a couple of nights ago about some of the differences between Australian and US or American football, and I was interested to learn that that there are very specific specialisations with American football players. They tend to play one or two positions, which is a little bit less the case in Australia. But one of the other big differences, I think, is that the Americans pad up quite heavily. My 7-year-old son has been quite stunned to see how safe they are by comparison to the lunatics that we have, who tough, rough and tumble, and don't wear any protective gear at all.
Yes, no, I can see that, but it's very difficult to tell what's going on.
Absolutely. Well, I think next time you're in town, we'll have to take you to a match and sit by you and explain the rules.
As long as you keep me plied with beer while we're watching, I'm fine with that.
Oh, I think that goes without saying. Absolutely. So, Andrew, changing tact a little bit, I'm interested to know what advice you would give to your 10-year-old self.
Oh, goodness, that is a tough one. At 10, you don't care about anything, really. You don't see anything beyond the classroom and the playground, really. You have no idea. And I honestly don't think an adult can really give advice to a 10-year-old. 10-year-old will never take it in or never understand. Plus, of course, the world will change. We have no idea what kind of world they'll face in the future. So I would say you have to keep it very general and very high level. And I would say, don't get too excited about the things that you think are going well, or don't get too downhearted about the things that might go wrong, and play it down the middle, and something else will turn up tomorrow. You'll take the rough with the smooth. Okay,
I think that's some good lessons we can live by there. Andrew, you've had quite a varied career, as you talked to us a little bit about at the start. What has been the biggest turning point in your career, would you say?
I don't think there's one. I would pick out three, quite honestly, if I'm allowed to.
Sure.
And the first is obviously not a turning point; it's a starting point. Coming out of college and entering the professional world, it's completely random what you end up doing. Yes. You're looking for a fairly decent paycheck. You're looking for something that's interesting and has prospects. And you're looking for something where you won't be mistreated or exploited. Mm-hmm. And so I interviewed with professional services company like Deloitte. I interviewed with, food products. I interviewed with shipping. Okay. And it just turned out on the day it clicked best with an oil and gas company. And so that random starting point kind of defined the rest of my career, because, I do define myself more by the sector, the energy sector, particularly the oil and gas sector, than by any particular skill like being a lawyer or being an accountant or something like that. I'm an oil and gas professional or an energy professional. And so, I found that interesting and have stuck with it ever since, and it's been endlessly fascinating. But that starting point, could have been anything, quite honestly. Okay. So quite important that, second turning point was clearly moving from my first job in the corporate world into a consulting company, also, based in continental Europe, based in Paris. Mm-hmm. So it brought that international when you're doing short-term consulting projects, you get exposed to a huge range of context, situations, client requirements, people. It's like every year of your professional life, it's like you're getting 5 years of experience.
Okay.
And so it's really an accelerator for becoming competent both in subject matter knowledge, in project management, in relationships, that type of thing. And so I think that was a really important turning point. And the third big turning point, as you alluded to, was moving from Europe to the US, close on 20 years ago. Again, with no intention of staying long term, but it's been great. Houston is a wonderful city to be in the energy business, the oil and gas business.
Sure.
Your doors are open, you can talk to people, it's fabulous for networking, and so I've really enjoyed every minute of it.
Do you anticipate you might head back to live in Europe, or is that I appreciate a family with a few different passports? That's a really difficult question.
Yeah, I mean, my kids are growing up now. I have two of them have left, and I only have one left at home. So I think they'll settle in the US, and so from that perspective, it's easy to visit Europe. So I'll probably stay settled here because the kids will be on this side of the pond.
Well, that makes sense. I can understand that. Andrew, is there any one thing that you would change about the business environment of today? We've just been through a very big downturn in our sector from 2014 to 2017, essentially. And a lot of really great people, got laid off purely from a cost perspective. And I really think that's a shame. I think I would like companies, not just in our sector, but across the board, not to see people as expendable. We've got this tremendous talent out there, and some way of keeping people occupied through the cycles and finding valuable things for them to do. It's tremendously wasteful and demoralizing for the people involved, and so that's I don't know what the answer is. Although I would say that I guess coming into a professional services firm like the two of us work for, that is a bit of a different culture from an investor-owned corporate culture, and I'm not quite sure I can put my finger on it, but that does seem to be more accepting of the human value of the people that work there in some way. And I don't think you would have that short-term need to push people out of the door quite so much in this type of environment. So if there's a way of kind of generalizing a little bit of this type of culture more widely, I think that would be a good thing. Yeah, well, and I think that's a really positive element. I mean, I was chatting to somebody earlier today about Deloitte in the US leading the way in terms of paid maternity leave, which is very different in the States compared to Europe and to a lesser extent Australia. And I mean, there are some elements along those lines that I think are certainly pretty appealing.
Yes, no, I think this kind of organisation, people are clearly its value. Everything the firm does is based on the abilities of its people, but it does. I think it's something to do with also the partnership structure. There's a huge effort to take care of people and make sure they are valued, that they feel valued, and their value is actually used to the best of the best use possible. Yeah,
and I mean, I'm definitely the beneficiary of that. I'm just coming up for the end of 3 months where I was supported by the Australian firm to come and be based in Chicago because of something that was really important to me personally, to finalise my kids' citizenship. And most of the people I spoke to outside of the Deloitte world in the lead up to that, explaining to them what I was doing, were quite shocked that I work for an organisation where that is allowed or permitted or encouraged to happen.
Yes, we're very lucky, I think.
Yeah.
And I wish it could be more generalised.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, it's my 7 and 10-year-olds have told me that it's the trip of a lifetime. So.
Oh, great! I bet they're having a lot of fun.
Oh, absolutely. I don't want to go home. Andrew, what might people not know about you?
I don't talk a lot about this, but I did have a detour in my career at one point.
Tell me.
Which didn't last very long, but it was in your part of the world, actually. I worked for one of Deloitte's competitors, another professional advisory firm, who offered me a great position in New Zealand to help them build out their Asia Pacific energy consulting practice. And so I spent 6 months, a long period of 6 months in New Zealand, loving the country, loving the place, the scenery, the experience, but finding out that the people that had hired me had incredibly overestimated the market and their ability to bring in work, and essentially there was very little to do.
Oh dear.
So I headed back with my tail between my legs pretty soon.
Didn't kill your love or thirst for professional services long term, though?
No, but it took a while. That was a mid-career stuff thing.
Okay. Oh, I'm interested, perhaps over a beer or a glass of wine, to hear a little more about that. I didn't know you'd spent time.
Yes, but wrong turnings happen, and you learn from them, and you go on and do something different.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and would you say that it informed your later career, or were there learnings from that?
No, not particularly. just what a beautiful place New Zealand is, and I'm glad I did it.
Yep.
But no real learnings. Maybe. No, I better not go there. No real learning.
All right, okay. Well, that segues superbly into my next question, which is whether you learn more from success or failure.
That's quite a binary question, isn't it? I think, thinking about it, there's very little that you do that is an unqualified success or an unqualified failure. Normally it's in the mean, it's around the mean, a bit overperforming, a bit underperforming. I don't think there's been absolute successes or failures. I try and learn from everything and do better next time. But context, a lot of it's about context and context change. So I think you accumulate experience, whether it works out well or doesn't, and just move on. So it's a bit like the advice to the 10-year-old self. Don't overestimate success or failure, and play it down the middle.
Okay. A time from let me start that again. Aside from the time that you briefly spent in the land of the Great White Cloud, are there any significant challenges that you've navigated in your career that you've drawn particular strength or insight from that you can share?
I think professionally, I talked about the advantages of being exposed to a great diversity of consulting projects in different countries. It's also a huge challenge because getting it right every time is not possible.
Sure.
And so the time you have to spend in understanding the context and doing the best you can. I think there are examples of big challenges. Not everything works out well, and it's not always your own fault. I remember one assignment in West Africa. We had a series of our firm had a series of projects with the same client, and I happened to go in there to talk about investment strategy in one part of the business. And a guy that was doing an IT project who'd left the week before had left them very unsatisfied.
From your firm?
Through our firm,
Okay.
yes. And so I had a call from my boss in Europe saying, well, it's not your project, but you'd better stay there until they're happy. We'll send you some help. And so, I think a 7 or 10 day visit turned out to be about 13 weeks.
Wow, that's quite a discrepancy.
So, you at that stage, you just have to, take it as it comes. But challenges like that.
How did the 13 weeks play out?
I did what I could. They actually sent somebody qualified out to help me, but I had to supervise and be the liaison between that guy and the management team, and really make sure that he was doing what they wanted. Okay. And so finally, we did turn it around. Finally. So you became an IT expert in 13 weeks? No, but I managed to. I actually was. It was something about inventories, as far as I remember. But so I managed to be the translator of what they wanted into the developer who was doing the work. We brought in to do the work.
And I guess even if not your area of expertise, becoming more experienced and having more experience working with senior clients, it's that listening, irrespective almost of whether it is your deep subject matter expertise, that is critical and learned.
Absolutely. No, that's the key thing, and just giving them the impression that you care and that you're taking care of what they want. It's as simple as that, essentially. And although it was a challenge. It was a very hard thing to get done at the time.
And happy client at the end of 13 weeks?
They kept on being a client. I'm not sure they were super happy, but they were happier, and we got more work. We kept on getting more work, so yes.
Well, that's probably a fairly firm indication of their levels of satisfaction.
Right, I hope so. I hope so.
Yeah. Andrew, what does nirvana in your career look like?
Nirvana. I enjoy content. I very much enjoy the role I'm in now, where I can work with a highly qualified and knowledgeable team in developing content around energy markets, and it's a bit broader now. I cover a little bit wider scope, but I enjoy that, and I enjoy mixing in what I think and know with what they think and know, and making something bigger and better out of it. However much I grapple personally with an issue or a problem or a piece of analysis, and then I think I've got it nailed, it becomes then you show it to your people you're working with.
Yes.
And so much more comes into it, and it just blows me away every time. So I love that process of working on real issues and putting them in context and making sense of them collaboratively.
I think one of the real benefits of working within a team is the shared expertise and experience and the different and diverse perspectives that people bring.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I always, I think I've learned never to totally trust my own judgment alone. So
sure.
Yeah. Absolutely, you're right.
Always a richer result, I think. Yeah. Now, a couple of fun questions now, Andrew. Even more fun than the ones that have preceded them. What is your what is your favourite song and why?
Oh, the soundtrack of your life is so complicated, and there are thousands. I mean, whoever said you don't listen to new music after you're about 25 or 30 is probably right. Although I have continued to add particularly jazz and classical, but I'll go for one song. It ages me a little bit, but must have been around the late 80s or early 90s, something like that. Yeah. There was an American singer called Bobby McFerrin. He had a song called "Don't Worry, Be Happy." silly little tune, but I actually quite enjoyed that, and it kind of uplifting.
It is uplifting. I like that song.
Do you remember?
Yeah. No. Oh, bless you. You're my favourite person today. No. I could sing that song. I won't do it now, but yeah, absolutely. I remember that song. Now, Andrew, if you could invite 3 guests to dinner, and they don't have to be living, who would they be?
Again, I'm not into, again, the possibilities are endless, obviously, but I think I'd go to the entertainment world, just to have some fun and find out a little bit more about what goes on behind the scenes.
Yep.
So
who's on your list?
I'd go for, I think one of my favorite actresses who's been in many movies I like is the English actress Emma Thompson.
Have you heard of her? I sure have. She's great.
One of my favorite movies was The Remains of the Day, again from about 20 years ago or something like that. But she's fabulous in that and fabulous in many other roles. The second one, I'm not sure how you'll like this, but an Australian national treasure, or maybe not, Dame Edna.
Oh, she's fabulous. I love her.
So she's, in England, very well liked.
Yes.
Not quite sure how she goes down in Australia, but absolutely hilariously funny.
Oh, she's fabulous. When I was in my early teens, my mum took us all to see her at the Arts Centre in Melbourne, and she was waving her gladiolis and throwing them out into the audience. And that was quite a few years ago. I remember it so distinctly.
Yeah, no, fabulous. And then I'll go for a singer. Again, there could be many. I'll go for an American this time. So again, somebody with a lot of staying power. I've always enjoyed Stevie Wonder.
Awesome.
He's been all my whole life, I guess, because he was a child singer and then has kept on going. There's a lot of old singers keeping going these days. Paul McCartney and people like that, Mick Jagger, and I've always enjoyed that and would love to. Must have great stories to tell.
I bet they would, and I notice you've covered 3 continents there as well, so very, very global of you.
Oh, okay, yeah, not intentionally,
okay.
but
just part of your makeup. So, Andrew, tell me about the best piece of business advice that you've ever received.
That's a very tough one. I struggle with that. I think being open to always learn from other people, involve as many people as you can in understanding what the issue is and what it means. I think context matters. I'm a bit suspicious of grand visions and that type of thing. I think business decisions must be grounded in context and context change, and so I think you've got to kind of best describe what the situation is before you get into a decision or a direction, and you basically always try and learn from history, what you've done in the past. Just it all accumulates. Somehow things make sense.
They almost always do. Andrew, you've talked to us through some of this already, but how did you get to where you are in terms of the leadership position that you're in today?
Oh gosh, I guess I just hung around.
I think there's a little more to it than that.
Staying power works wonders sometimes. Don't know when to give up, do something else. But no, you accumulate experience, you accumulate, contacts and people, and I'm lucky that I've been able to do things which are interesting along the way, and so whether it's leadership or not leadership, don't particularly care. I'm not somebody who's driven to be a leader. I just enjoy what I'm doing, and if it's leading a team or working with a team, I'm fine with that.
Okay.
I've also had lots of times where I've been a solo contributor, I'm fine with that as well. So I think it's just, sticking around is a big part of it.
I think you're grossly underestimating that, but I think, yes, variety is excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm putting words in your mouth ever so slightly there. And Andrew, just finally, do you have any career advice for our listeners out there?
People come to me quite often, to talk about this, and what I always tell them, don't try and make a very specific plan. You never know what's coming around the corner. Luck and opportunity play a huge part. So the best you can do is be ready, have some options, have some skills, keep networking, and when you get into a position, make it your own. I mean, whenever somebody gets hired into a position, there's a job description, there's an expectation. Yep. What actually happens is always more determined by what you can do than what the job description says. So you make it your own, but do it, know your skills and do them to the best of your ability, but also be curious the whole time about what's going on around you, and try and get outside your own niche from time to time.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point to close on. I mean, I've been with a firm for nearly 5 years, and if I think about the position description that that I signed up to back then, it has most certainly evolved, and particularly into some of the areas that I'm really passionate about and I think have strengths in.
That's because you evolved it.
Yes.
Because you have those strengths and passions, and you made that your job. And if you do it well, people like that. That's what they want you to do.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Andrew, I've really enjoyed our conversation today. It's great to catch up with you again on your now home turf in Houston. Thanks very much for your time.
Well, it's been a pleasure, and I promise to come to Australia in the near future, I hope.
Sounds good, and I promise that we'll take you to at least one AFL match then.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Andrew.